Hi, I'm Chris Marshall, field editor of Woodworker's Journal magazine. It's been about 25 years since I first used a table saw back in high school shop class, but I can still remember that big old gray Delta Unisaw sitting in the middle of the shop room floor. I bet if you think back to those days yourself, you can remember a big gray Unisaw too. After all, Delta's been making Unisaws for more than 70 years, and they've been mainstays in high school shop classes, professional cabinet shops, and home shops too. Well, as with most things in life, there's always some room for improvement, and Delta has taken that charge seriously for 2009 with a totally redesigned and re-engineered Unisaw. I've been lucky enough to have this saw in my shop for a couple of weeks, and I've put it through its paces, and let me tell you, it's an impressive machine. First thing I should tell you about the new Unisaw is this is an American-made tool. It is made and assembled in Jackson, Tennessee, and that's not something that most manufacturers can say anymore. It's got some great new safety features on it, as well as some new user features that should help make your woodworking more accurate and productive. So I thought I'd take a few minutes and show you around the new Unisaw. Let's take a closer look. Down in front of the saw is the most obvious change on the new model. Delta has taken the blade tilt wheel and moved it from the side of the saw around to the front. How have they been able to do that? Well, Delta's engineers changed the trunnion design from a three-piece cast iron trunnion to a single massive piece of cast iron. That allowed them to move that gearing from the side of the saw up in front. Now, for the first time on a Unisaw, you have full control of both blade height and blade tilt right in front of the saw, exactly where you need it. I love this feature. Delta has also re-engineered the bevel tilt scale. You're probably familiar with that crescent-style cutout on front of the saw with the sheet metal pointer that's pretty easy to knock out of adjustment and hard to read accurately. Well, Delta has gone with a clock-style face for its bevel tilt scale. They've put the pointer behind protective plastic so you can't knock it out of adjustment, and they've moved that pointer close to the scale. So no matter where you are, you always get a clear indication of exactly what your bevel tilt is. It's another great feature that improves your accuracy. Delta has also put a new kill switch on this saw. Rather than a paddle-style switch or a button, you've now got an omnidirectional kill switch. So whether you hit it with your knee or your hand on the corner of the switch or the middle of the switch, you're always going to shut this saw down when you need to. It's a great new safety feature. Now, moving around to the top of the saw, Delta has increased the size of the cast iron tabletop. But what's even more interesting for me is that Delta has actually moved the blade and arbor assembly further back on the tabletop. That comes from over 6 years of user feedback and research that's gone into this machine. So, how does that back position help you? Well, it gives you more area in front of the blade, and that's beneficial if you're making wide cross cuts on sheet goods, or if you're trying to get a heavy piece of timber started for a rip cut and you're 6 feet in front of the saw. The more space you've got in front of the blade, the more accurate you're going to be in getting that cut started, and the more confident you'll be about feeding it through. Every additional inch of space in front of this saw is a benefit for me. So how much more space do you get? Well, on most cabinet saws you get about 10 inches of room in front of the blade. With Delta's new Unisaw, and the blade raised to about 1.25 inches, you get almost 15 inches of space in front of the blade. It's a huge work area and a feature I really like. I'm also really excited about the guard feature on this saw. Delta equips the new Unisaw with a dual style blade guard. It's split and clear plastic, but it's also got an open area between the two halves of the guard, so you can look right down on the blade and get a clear line of sight on your cut. You can track that cut every step of the way. When you have the need to take the guard off the saw, say when you're setting up a dado set, it comes off without tools. You flip one lever on the guard, tip it up and off, and it's free. No wrenches required. The anti-kickback features on this saw come off easily as well. One push button and off they come. Now here's something you might not be aware of. Every new table saw manufactured in the United States must have a true riving knife that rises and falls with the blade. Of course, Delta's new Unisaw has a true riving knife with one added feature. There's a lever on front of this saw that you can pull and actually drop that riving knife down below the arc of the blade. Now why is that an advantage? Well, let's say you're cutting rabbets with a standard blade, or you're making cheek and shoulder cuts on tenons. With an ordinary guard system and splitter, you'd have to take those components off the saw or they'd be in the way. Not with Delta's new riving knife. With the riving knife set in the low position, you can go ahead and make that non-through cut, and this riving knife will never interfere with the workpiece. It's a great new feature. Now, when you're finished with those non-through cuts, you go back, flip this lever again, pull the riving knife to the high position, reinstall your guard and anti-kickback fingers, and you're back to making safe through cuts. So it's very versatile, and you can make that transition in seconds. It's another great feature on this saw. Now looking down inside the saw, Delta provides one of the largest throat plate openings I've ever seen on a cabinet saw. There's lots of room to get your hands down inside this machine for changing blades. Delta also gives you an arbor lock to lock the blade so that your blade changes only take one wrench, and you gotta love that. Even the arbor nut is improved on the new Unisaw, and I'll just spin it off here. Typically, you've got a cone washer and a separate nut. Not on the new Unisaw. Delta has incorporated both the cone washer and the nut into a one-piece design. So now you've got one thing to hang on to when you're down inside the saw changing your blades. I love that. It's even got a knurled surface around the end, so it's easier to hang on to. You're less likely to drop this down inside the machine. Down below the blade, Delta has also incorporated a blade shroud, and that's what catches most of the sawdust coming off the cut. It is connected to a 4-inch dust hose, and that routes to the back of the saw, and we'll take a closer look at that real soon. I should also mention some other great features inside this saw. The bottom of the cabinet has a ramped base, and that directs whatever sawdust isn't caught by the shroud down to the back of the saw where it's drawn away. Delta also gives you two options for motors on this machine. You can get a 3 horsepower or a 5 horsepower marathon motor. That's an American-made motor. It is 220 volts and single phase.